there, Jess here from Make and Do Crew, and today I'm going to show you how to make the tide pool rectangle tee. So as it sounds, this easy pattern is made from 2 big rectangles, which means that you can try it on as you go and double check the fit. There's absolutely no shaping in this pattern, so I think you'll find it quite meditative even if you're fairly new to crocheting garments. For this, we're going to be using Lion Brand's 24/7 cotton DK weight. So if you're familiar with 24/7 cotton in the typical worsted weight, this is the same type of yarn, just a thinner weight. And I like it even more than the original because it drapes really well in garments and it feels lightweight and cool for the summer. The hook size recommended in the pattern is a size E, but this is definitely variable depending on your tensions. In a minute, I'll show you how to crochet a gauge swatch, at which point you may choose to adjust your hook size, and that is completely fine. And speaking of the pattern, it is written in 9 sizes, extra small through 5X, and you're going to want to have that in front of you while we go through the video because you'll want to know the exact stitch counts for your size. In this video, I'm going to talk you through all the concepts that you need to know, and then the number of stitches you work will depend on the size of top that you're making. We're going to begin by practicing this stitch, and in that process, we'll be making a gauge swatch. So I will show you the steps of making this swatch, and you'll learn the stitch along the way, and you'll use those exact same skills and apply them to the larger rectangles that a pattern is based on. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the most absolutely important steps before you start any garment pattern is to make a gauge swatch. I am going to walk you through the steps of making your gauge swatch and each step of this stitch, and then tell you exactly how to start your rectangles. At that point, if you need a refresher on how the stitch pattern is worked, just rewind back here to the section on making the gauge swatch because that will show you step by step how to work this stitch repeat. To start this stitch, we want to chain a multiple of 5 plus 3. So we're going to begin by creating 38 chains, and then we'll talk about how to work row 1. And the thing about this stitch is that working into this first chain is a bit of a pain in the neck, as is often true with your first row of crochet. So working a really long rectangle, you might find row 1 to be a bit tedious, but I promise that the stitch is very easy after that. Please don't get discouraged when you look at this chain and you think, oh my goodness, how many of these little chains do I have to work into? It gets so much easier after row 1. I'm going to finish up these chains here and I'll meet you back here for row 1. And now that my chain is complete, we are going to start row 1 by skipping our first 3 chains. So 1, 2, 3, and we're going to double crochet in our 4th chain from the hook. Those 3 skipped chains are going to count as our first double crochet. So in order to double crochet, I've yarned over and inserted my hook, and now I'm just going to pull up 1 loop, pull up another loop. Now I technically have 2 double crochets because those skipped chains are our first double crochet. So we've got 1, 2, and we're going to work 3 more. So I'm working into the next chain here, and I'm working a double crochet, and then again I'm going to pull up a loop, go through 2 of those loops, and then yarn over and go through 2 again. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4. At the beginning and end of these double crochet rows, we want to have 5 double crochets. You'll see in a second that the rest of the row we're going to do 4 double crochets, but the beginning and end of the row always have 1 extra. So we've got 5 double crochets here. I'm going to chain 1 and then skip my next chain. So it can be a little hard to see here. Here's the last chain I worked into. You can see my stitches sitting in there. So I'm going to skip the next chain and then work my next double crochet into the following chain. So we're skipping 1 total. I have my chain that I made up here. So we're creating a chain 1 space, and that's why we're skipping a chain at the bottom. It's a lot of mentions of chain in a few seconds. I will repeat this again for the next repeat. So I've got my first double crochet there, and now I'm going to work 3 more. So I'm working into my next foundation chain here, and I've got 2 double crochets, and then this is my 3rd here. The first row of this is a little fiddly, so it's best to just sit down, put on a good podcast or show, and know that it's gonna be a little annoying, but that this is so easy afterward. All right, so I've got 4 double crochets, which means now I want to chain 1 up here, and that means I'm also going to skip a stitch at the bottom on the foundation chain. So that's my next chain I'm going to skip here, and I'm working a double crochet into the chain after that. Like I said, after we set up the beginning of the row, we're working 4 double crochets each time and separating them by a chain 1 space. So as you proceed in the pattern, this is going to continue. We'll always do 5 double crochets at the beginning and end of these odd number rows, and then everything in the middle will be sets of 4. Now we have 5 at the beginning, our chain 1 space, 4 double crochet, chain 1 space, 4 more double crochet. So now I would chain 1, skip the next foundation chain, and work 4 double crochet. So we're going to repeat that pattern of our chain 1 and 4 more double crochet all the way till we get to the end, and I'll show you how to finish this row. As we're coming to the end here, I want to show you there's a couple places you can insert your hook on the chain. So I'm working under the top 2 loops, and that means I'm just inserting my hook right here to do my double crochet. There are a few ways to do this. Some people like to insert under this back bump right here. You can do that. You can really do it however you want, but it's important to be consistent throughout the row. So when you pick a look that you like, then just stick with that, because that's what's going to create a nicer edge along the bottom and make sure that it doesn't feel twisted and curly. So from here, I have 2 double crochets for my last cluster. So I am going to work under these 2 bars. There's my 3rd double crochet, and again, I want to make sure I have 4 double crochets. And because this is the end of the row, I'm working 1 more. The beginning and the end of the row get 5 double crochets. So now in this little swatch, I have 7 total repeats. You can see we've already started developing a pattern here where we have clusters of 4 or 5 and then little windows in between. So row 2 is going to actually work into these little chain space windows that we've created. And row 2 is worked all in single crochets and chain stitches. I am going to chain 1 at the beginning of this row, turn my work this direction. So this is considered the wrong side of this stitch repeat because it's the back side of the double crochets. So I am going to begin by single crocheting into the top of my first stitch. All right, so I have that, and now I want to work 4 chains. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I'm going to skip all of my double crochets here and work a single crochet into my chain space window. So these rows are awesome. They go by really fast because you're just kind of leapfrogging over all your double crochets. So now that I have that single crochet, I'm going to chain 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now again, I'm going to work into this chain space window. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, single crochet in the window. For all the tedium of row 1, row 2 is really breezy. It goes so fast, it's really fun. I am going to continue like that, 4 chains and then single crochet in the chain 1 space. Just like this, I've completed my last chain 1 space here. And now I want to do 4 more chains, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then because we have 5 double crochets here, I'm going to single crochet in the top of the last one. So all of these rows are symmetrical. The way they start is the way they end. We started with a single crochet in the top of a double crochet, and that's exactly how we're going to end. I have 4 chains, and then the top of my double crochet here is technically, it's a turning chain. So I just kind of stick my hook in there. I don't look too hard for that top chain. I just stick it in there like that and work my last single crochet. Let's take a look at what we have now. It doesn't look that much different than when we completed row 1, but it will after we do row 3, because these little spaces will open up and it'll create this nice delicate grid. So I now have 7 chain spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. To begin row 3, I again need to start with a double crochet. So I'm going to chain 3, 1, 2, and 3. I find that chaining these a little tighter than normal helps create the right height of a double crochet. So now I have lifted my yarn up and flipped it around. Again, I have the right side of my fabric facing forward, and I am going to do 4 double crochets in this chain space. So we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now you'll find as you're crocheting this that everything kind of bunches over to one side of your chain space, and that is totally fine. It is going to work itself out the more you crochet. So it's not going to look this weird forever. I have now a double crochet that matches my double crochet in row 1, and then 4 more double crochet in my chain space. I'll spread them out so you can see. So this pattern creates a nice grid, and everything should stack on top of 2 rows below. The odd number rows should stack on top of each other. We've got row 1 and row 3 looking like nice little building blocks. Okay, I have my single crochet here from row 2, so I'm going to chain 1 and then put 4 double crochets in my next chain space. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, it's pretty easy from here. I bet you can guess what happens next. We are going to chain 1 and then work 4 more double crochets in this space. Again, chain 1, 4 double crochets in the next space, and we're going to continue like that until we finish with 4 double crochets in this space, and I'll then show you how this row ends. Now I've worked across and ended with 4 double crochets here, and this part is super important not to just stop here. If you remember, we have 5 double crochets at the beginning of the row. So I have 4 double crochets, and then I'm going to work 1 more double crochet into that single crochet from row 2. So this sets me up with a beautiful little grid, and actually that is all there is to this stitch pattern. I told you it would be easy once we got that pesky foundation row out of the way. Okay, so to continue like this, you are just going to work row 2 and row 3. So just a reminder, to start row 2, you would just work 1 chain, and then you're going to single crochet into that first double crochet, chain 4, and single crochet into your first chain space. So that is row 2, and row 3 is what we just did, where you start with chain 3, put 4 double crochets in that space, work a chain 1, 4 double crochets, chain 1, 4 double crochets. It really is quite easy. To finish up your swatch here, we are just going to work repeats of rows 2 and 3. You want to end up with at least 5 inches of height. You want 5 inches going this way and 5 inches going this way, so you can accurately measure your gauge and make sure you're on track before you start your bigger rectangles. So in order to get 5 inches, you're going to want about a total of 10 of these double crochet rows. I find it almost easier to just count those rather than the little row 2 in between. So once you've got about 10 double crochet rows, as you can see, I have this nice big swatch to measure my gauge. And if you're new to measuring gauge, I'm going to walk you through it right now. What we want to do is measure a center section of this swatch and make sure that we have the right number of stitches. And it's okay if you don't. That simply means you need to adjust your hook size, because the tension that you crochet with and any given designer crochets with can vary, of course, because it's quite personal, and so needing to adjust your hook to be smaller or larger is completely acceptable. I am going to measure the center 4 inches of this swatch here, and I have it lined up between these 2 clusters here, and then 4 inches ends with this cluster right here. In a stitch pattern like this, I find it easiest to count the main elements. In this case, that's double crochet clusters right here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 double crochet clusters in this 4 inches. 4 inches might sound a little arbitrary. It's just kind of the common unit of measurement that most patterns use. Now I'm going to measure in the other direction, and I want to count how many rows I have in 4 inches like this. So in this case, we have a combination of double crochet rows and these chain stitch rows. Let's first count the double crochet rows. We have 6 double crochet rows, but we technically want to count this chain row in there from that all the way up to where my tape measure ends, because if I were just to stop counting here at my 6th double crochet row, I wouldn't actually be at 4 inches. So 4 inches should actually include 6 of these double crochet rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus 6 chain rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Once you have a swatch that meets the pattern gauge, you've confirmed what hook size you need to use, it's time to make those rectangles. In the written pattern, you'll see exactly how many foundation chains you need for your size, and you're going to want to work all those stitches, and now you can do it with confidence because you know that your long rectangle will turn out the width you need it to in order to make your size in the written pattern. Go ahead and work on that rectangle, enjoy the process, and I will meet you back here to talk about how to finish it. So when we're coming to the end of our rectangle, we're going to end with a wrong side row. So that's the row where we're doing the chain stitches and the single crochet. So I'm just about to complete the end of my row here. And then it's important to pause and measure your rectangle at this point, because if you're off by a bit in your gauge, you can actually just still make this work by just measuring and making sure you create the right size rectangle that will fit your body. Ideally, you would do this after blocking, but if you just want to get a rough check-in, you would measure this and say, okay, cool. For me, I'm at about 10.5 inches. So if I multiply that by 4, because we're going to have 4 of these going around our bodies, 2 total folded in half, then the shirt will have about a 42-inch bust. So if that feels like it will fit well around your actual bust, whatever your measurement is, then you're in great shape. I tend to go for 5 to 10 inches of positive ease, meaning 5 to 10 inches of extra fabric beyond the actual bust measurement. So if you find that your rectangle is a little too narrow for you, just add a couple rows and end with a wrong side row. If you find, oh, it's gotten a little bit big, you can tear a couple rows out. As sad as that would be, it's better to have a top that fits you. And getting the measurement of the rectangle correct is more important than getting the exact number of rows. My suggestion would be just to leave the yarn attached at this point so that you can work the rest of the pattern and not have to attach another strand. So we are going to complete the exact same steps to make an identical rectangle. The exact same thing. You want it to measure, have the same number of rows and measure the same. And then we'll come back here when we have 2 of these. And magically, here we go. I have 2 now. It's a little hard to tell because they're so long, but I have them folded in half. And what you're going to want to do now is block your rectangles. If you're unfamiliar with blocking, it's just the act of adding some moisture to your project so that all the stitches and the fibers just chill out and relax a little bit. They look a little tidier, and it can help you iron out any sort of discrepancies between the tension on one piece and the tension on the other. If one of your rectangles is slightly longer because you were more relaxed when you crocheted it or something like that, blocking can help take care of a little bit of that. So what you want to do is pin this rectangle, ideally to a blocking board, which is just like a big piece of foam. If you don't have that, I have laid down a towel before and pinned it to the carpet. I am not saying that's a good idea. Please don't get mad at me if you ruin your carpet, but I've done that before. And then you want to pin it straight and then use an iron with a steam functionality or a steamer to spray steam on your yarn. You don't want to actually touch the yarn, but that's going to help. These have already been blocked. You can see they look nice and tidy, and the fabric is just even a little bit more drapey than it was before. I have a whole tutorial on blocking if this concept is new to you, but now we're going to move on to how to finish at the top because we are almost done. And because the rectangles are essentially reversible, you want to lay it out and decide, okay, this is going to be my back, this is going to be the front on the other side, and kind of arrange them how you like. This is how we want them oriented for the shirt. We have the final row, this wrong side row here, facing in. This is going to be the center of the shirt here. And then this is going to be the opening for our necks. So our foundation rows, they're out here, and that's where the armholes are going to be. Okay, your job now is to pin these together. And I would say to pin to like 10-ish inches here, 10-ish inches on the other side, and use stitch markers. We're going to pin this together. And the whole purpose here, we're not doing a perfect job. The point here is to pin it together so you can get a sense of how the whole thing is fitting and how open you want your neckline to be. So I'm just doing that. I don't want the stitches to pull out a lot, so I'm putting it in between my double crochet clusters there. But I want to put enough stitch markers here to hold the whole thing together. And I'm going to leave an opening for the head up here. Again, like 10-ish inches, and evaluate how deep you want your V to be. Most people will choose to make their back of the shirt closed a little bit more than the front, so you can show off a little bit of neckline and cleavage if you have it, if that's your vibe. I have some measurements in the pattern that you can follow, and they're definitely a good starting place, but ideally you're curating this for the exact fit you want and to suit your body. So the point is to pin it together and try it on and adjust your stitch markers so you really know where you want your neckline opening to stop in the front and in the back. And while it's not necessarily essential, I would suggest pinning the sides together right here, at least up a bit, because that will hold it around your body a little better and you get a little better sense of how that neckline is going to fit. Once you have everything kind of pinned up, go try it on, admire yourself in the mirror, and decide what you want your neckline to fit like. And if you're making this as a gift for someone else, you're more generous than me, for one, and it's okay that they're not trying it on. I give measurements in the pattern. You can definitely follow those, and those will suit most people. So don't worry if the person you're making this for is not right in front of you. I'm trying to give you some extra tips so you can customize it for your body if you so desire. Once you have everything pinned together and you're happy with the fit, one suggestion I have, I am a big fan of leaving myself notes so that I can easily come back, get oriented, and not forget what I'm doing and accidentally crochet in the wrong spot. So I'm going to pin this little tag on here that tells me this is my front. And this is going to be helpful because we're going to unpin just the front and the back center seams right now so that we can add a little bit of a buttonhole edge. I'm going to go ahead and put my back label on there, and if nothing else, hopefully this helps you watching this stay oriented, but it's definitely a hack for myself too. It's not just for your benefit. I'm now taking out the stitch markers that I have in here holding everything together, but I'm going to leave a marker at the top of this so that I have it marked where I want my neckline to begin. This is the one right here for me that is indicating where we want to stop for the neckline. So I have my stitch marker here between, obviously our last row is this chain row, but I have it between the double crochet clusters because that's a little easier to see. And then when I take this last stitch marker out in the back, indicating where I want my back to be seamed to, I am going to leave it in place but on the opposite rectangle. So this is the one that's going to be on the left side of your body. And I have that again between some double crochet clusters here, and it's indicating how far up I'm going to seam the back. To just be super clear, what we're gonna do now is work from the bottom of the shirt up to our marker, and we're gonna work in single crochet, and this is going to give the foundation that we're gonna sew the buttons to. So that's gonna be a little buffer here. We're gonna seam that to our other rectangle and then sew the buttons on top. These won't be functional buttonholes because this top very easily fits over your head. So instead of dealing with little fiddly holes, we're going to fake it. Okay, so you should have your right rectangle, and we're now going to work a row of single crochet stitches, beginning with a chain 1 here, and we're just going to put, instead of double crochets in each of these chain spaces, we're just going to put 4 single crochets. So that just looks like 2, 3, and 4. And then you're going to do that in each of these chain 4 spaces. So 4 single crochets in each of those, and continue like that. And then as we approach our stitch marker here, indicating where we want the V-neck to start, we're going to work our last single crochet into the single crochet right here that was between those clusters. So that's going to be our last stitch of this row. And if you are left-handed, the easiest way to do this is just to attach your yarn right here at your stitch marker and then do the same thing but in the opposite direction. So you would chain 1 and then work 4 single crochets in the first chain space there, and then 4 in each one, and end with a single crochet right down here. And when you've completed this row, you should have this delicate little edging like this. Next I'm going to chain 1 and then work back in single crochet in the opposite direction. We're just gonna single crochet in every stitch until we get to the end of the row, and then we're gonna do one more row like that where we just work back. Our third row is just single crochet in each stitch as well. And then you're going to repeat the exact same thing on the back section. So here we are, we have our mile marker showing us we're on the back, and it's the same thing we just did where we're going to chain 1 and then we're going to do the single crochet across and then back in single crochet and then back again in single crochet. And just a reminder, if you're left-handed, you're going to attach your yarn right here where your stitch marker is and work in this direction just like we did on the other rectangle. So you can go ahead and do that part, and then we'll meet back here and talk about how to join everything together into a top. All right, let's check out what we have going on here. I have completed 3 rows of single crochet for my front here and 3 rows of single crochet for my back. So you can see that on this example, at least they're staggered. The front is a little bit shorter, the back's going to be a bit taller, but again, this is customized to you. And now you're good to fasten off in both of these spots and leave a long tail here for seaming. If you're seaming with variegated yarn like this, my suggestion would be to try to use the same color as in your last row. You can see here I'm running into a much brighter color. I don't want to actually seam with this because it's just going to be more visible right here. So I'm going to see if I can get through the seam with this yarn here, and if not, I'm going to attach a new strand. I'm going to fasten off on both sides here, and I'm going to use one tail for seaming the front pieces together and one tail for seaming the back. I'm just going to flip this over so you can see what I'm doing. All right, I have my back facing up. This is the middle of my back here and the right sides of the fabric facing out. Again, the way that I can tell it's the right side of the fabric is that I have the front of those double crochets facing out. And now I want to use stitch markers to line up our clusters here so that I can seam this together for the smoothest possible join. Instead of counting like 4 single crochets, I think what's easiest here is to look from this cluster spacing and this cluster spacing or this one and make sure that we're sticking with the grid that already exists in the stitches. And I like to just use stitch markers because when things get a little wiggly while you're seaming, they'll help hold everything together. I'm just going to place a couple of those, making sure I keep all of my grid lined up, and I'm going to rotate this so that I can manage it a little bit easier. You can position this however you want because you're not filming a video, but I'm going to be working my seam using this yarn here, this tail, and working from here down to the bottom of the shirt. And some people call this the mattress stitch, some people call it a zigzag stitch, but we're basically working back and forth, lining up each stitch and working under both loops of each stitch across the row. And again, this is my right side of fabric facing. So I want to connect this stitch. We're essentially in the space between the clusters here if I follow this line up. So I want to work under the loops of this single crochet here. And I'm just working from the bottom and pulling my yarn out. And then I'm going to work under the loops of the next stitch here and pull my yarn out. So this is a bit like lacing a shoe. We're going to then work under the 2 bars of the next stitch. The row that you are working into chains, it's going to be a little bit weird because those chains are just floppier than a regular single crochet stitch, but what's most important here is making sure that the seam visually lays flat. It's less important to get the perfect stitch alignment or anything like that. What matters most is how it looks. So I'm working stitch for stitch, but if for some reason you have like you're off by your stitch counts off or something like that, you're actually more importantly just going for a flat looking seam. So we're just going to work back and forth like this. And what I like to do is keep it fairly loose, but then tighten it up every few stitches. I'm not pulling tight enough to make anything pucker. I'm just tightening it so that there's not any loosey-goosey gaps. So we're gonna work like that all the way to the bottom of the shirt right over here. And then when you've gotten to the end of your seam here, we just want to weave in the end while we already have this tapestry needle threaded. So I like to just do this on the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm going to just kind of stick my needle in between the densest part of some of these single crochet stitches. And I want to make sure that I can't see my needle through on this side. And then I'm going to pull my yarn through. I find, especially with items that are going to get used or worn a lot, like blankets, clothing, it's just so important to weave in your ends well so that you can wash them and not have things kind of fall apart in the process. So I like to go back and forth through the densest part of the stitch like that. And I find that if you do it in a few slightly different places, then it's not chunky and noticeable in any one spot. So I went here and now I'm going to go down here, and then I'm doing a total of 4 times, 4 back and forths. And this is the 5th time through. I'm just going to tuck that end under and then snip this off. And now we've taken care of that yarn tail, and we can talk about seaming the front. I have this flipped over now so that we can see the front, and you have 2 choices here. You can just replicate the same seam that you did on the back, where you make these flush and then you seam them together with that zigzag mattress stitch. Or if you want, you can have this look more like a real button flap and overlap with the other side of it. So that's how I have this pinned here. I have taken this extra button flap and it's covering basically this row of clusters. And I've pinned it just like before, making sure to line up my clusters so that I have the same number on each side. And I'm going to use this yarn tail I have left over and then work in this direction. So I'll show you how we do that now. Just like with the back seam, our goal is to create the cleanest looking join possible. And in this case, what's important is going to be to line up this edge of the flap really nicely with the row below so that it's not like wiggly like that. So we just want to keep an eye on keeping it straight as you stitch. If you notice it's starting to get off a bit, just unthread your needle and take out a few stitches, because this is going to be important in making the front of your top look tidy. I have my tapestry needle here, and I am going to work starting from the top edge, and I just want to move my yarn over here to this front corner. So I'm just going to kind of thread it through the back and then bring it out on this corner because I want to tack this corner down. Okay, so I've got that over here. And now I obviously want to make sure that I'm not sewing all the way through the shirt. So I'm going to put my hand in here to support all the fabric in between, and then I'm going to work in and out in a basting stitch. So that means I'm going into the back fabric and pulling my needle back out, and then going back up through both loops on the crochet stitch here. That's my single crochet. You don't have to do this in every single stitch, but then I want to go back over into the next stitch here, and then if you can see, I'm just pulling my needle back up. If you've ever sewn anything by hand, this is kind of the traditional running stitch that you would use in sewing. So you can see like that. And then I'll move this stitch marker here. So as I'm doing this, I'm keeping an eye on my clusters to make sure that they're staying lined up so we can keep that visual grid. And I'm just gonna work back under those loops and then pop my needle back up over here, pull it out, and I'm just gonna continue like this in that running stitch until we get to the bottom of the shirt. And now we've got this seam finished here, but we want to make sure that when we wash this, we don't have any little pieces sort of rolling up. So we're going to tack down the other side of this on the inside of the top. So go ahead and turn that wrong side out. So now we have this inside out, and on the inside, I am just going to bring my yarn through my seamy yarn to the other side. And the intention is really just to connect this flap down so that it doesn't dry in any sort of a weird way when you wash it. In order to do that, I'm just going to pick up a couple loops here. I'm working into the base of these single crochet stitches here. You can kind of insert your needle like wherever works best depending on where this is naturally falling for you. So I'm just working under a couple loops on one side and then a couple loops on the other side, and I'm skipping about a centimeter at a time as I'm doing this, kind of like a little whip stitch. And like I said, we just want this to lay flat and be secure for the wash. It will look pretty tidy, but this is less important to look good than the one on the other side, because that's the one you're gonna see when you're wearing it. So once we get to the top of this button flap here, go ahead and weave in this yarn tail, and then we'll talk about how to finish off the sides. Okay, we're almost there. So if you still have those stitch markers in place on the sides, you can remove them now, because we're gonna work one row of single crochet along our foundation edges on both sides, and that's gonna create a nice tidy edge, especially for us to join at the side right here. It's very important here to have the right side of your fabric facing out. So look at it, you should have, if you did the button flap like I did, that should be on the outside, and then you should see the front of your double crochets, and that's how you know it's your right side. I am going to demonstrate this on this side, so because I'm right-handed, I'm going to attach my yarn right here. If you are left-handed, you would attach it over in this corner because you're gonna work that way. We're gonna start right over here, and we just wanna attach our yarn right here in the very top of the first stitch. I just happen to be attaching mine in the top of a turning chain here. So I am going to insert my hook in the top of that third chain. And I like to attach my yarn by just putting a slip knot on my hook and then inserting my hook where I want to attach it, and then just yarning over and pulling through. Once my yarn is attached here, I'm just going to work into the first stitch I can really see. Technically, you could make a single crochet in the top of this turning chain, but it's not important. What's more important here is we just have a smooth edge. And so we're going to insert our hook under those bars to do our single crochets. So I've got my hook under there, and I'm going to single crochet, and we're going to single crochet in each stitch. So if you see right here, if I'm looking from the front, I've got these two bars kind of like this. I can insert my hook under there and single crochet. Let's do a couple more. Once you get on a roll here, you can definitely see where to insert your hook on each stitch. So I'm just going under each of those, working a single crochet. This is a point where if your tension changed a bit between your foundation row and the rest of your rectangle, you can sort of correct things here. If your foundation row is maybe a bit loose and you blocked it, and then now you want to tighten it up a bit further, these stitches should kind of tidy up and even out any inconsistencies. That's part of the reason a finishing edge like this is helpful. So I'm just going to continue single crocheting like this in each stitch until I get all the way to the end of this rectangle side. And then when you're at the end of this row, I want to show you what that looks like. We're going to single crochet in the second to last stitch, and then the last one is just that last little V that you have there before you get to the very end of the row. When you've completed the last one, fasten off, leaving a long tail, because we're going to use this for our seaming. So give yourself, like, I would say 36 inches or so to be safe, and then you can fasten off and then repeat the same single crochet row on the opposite side. Now, before we seam the sides, I would highly recommend trying your top on again and just deciding how deep you want your armholes. So you can pin the sides together, and then I would suggest leaving somewhere between like 10 and 15 of these unseamed on each side. So there are specific recommendations in the pattern, and for this size, I'm leaving 12 unseamed on each side, so that's a total of 24. And when I'm saying unseamed, I'm talking about 24 clusters around here, so it's 12 on each side. So if you want to start there as sort of a recommendation, pin it together and then just evaluate. Do you like how open that is? Is it going to show too much of your underarm or bra? Do you want it deeper? This is the time to make a choice about that and customize it for whatever you're looking for in your top. And honestly, really, you don't have to make the decision right now, because you can work on the seam and then just carefully try it on while you have your needle attached and evaluate it and make any fine-tuning seam adjustments there. So I'm not making you commit yet, don't worry. I don't like to commit to any crafty decisions ahead of time. I have pinned this here, and again, I'm making sure that I line up all of these clusters. We're going to use that same technique of kind of zigzag mattress stitching, and we're going to use one of the tails that you have, either the tail that you have from when you first started your foundation row, if you saved a bit of yarn there, or the tail that you saved when you just fastened off your single crochet edging. I would suggest, if you're using a variegated yarn like this, choosing the one that matches the colors in your last row the best. I don't have a lot of green there, so I'm not going to use this one. Instead, I'm going to use this off-white one, and I have a different tapestry needle right now. You may wonder if that is intentional for the seam, and the answer is nope. I just lose all my stuff all the time, so I have a bunch laying around, and this one just happens to have a little bit sharper point, which is actually comes in super handy with weaving in ends. If you don't have any like this, I highly recommend them. I've seen them called upholstery needles. I am going to unpin this here just so that I can really situate things. And I have the right sides of the fabric facing out again, just like we did when we did that back seam. We're using the same stitch and technique here. So I want the right sides showing, and I am going to work zigzag across all the way up this seam until I get to this marker showing where I want my armhole to begin. Wherever you've decided, then you're going to work the seam up there, and when you get there, then you'll just weave in your yarn tail, because you'll be extremely close to being done. I'll just demonstrate to you the first few stitches here. I'm going to work under this turning chain right here. That's not what you have to do. I'm simply doing that because the rectangle really seems as if it should start there. I'm kind of making a game time decision to work into that stitch. Like we mentioned before, it's much less important where you actually sew for this than that the seam looks really flat and tidy. So the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to make sure you're working stitch for stitch. But if something weird comes up where you realize you've made a mistake, then just do whatever is the smoothest seam. I'm working under both loops of this single crochet from the bottom up and out, and then both loops, I'm working under both loops of the opposite single crochet. And again, just like before, I want this seam tight enough that it's not kind of spreading apart and showing that almost like corset or shoelace look, but I don't want to pull it too tight in a way that causes it to pucker or look bunchy. So we're just going to seam back and forth like that in that zigzag pattern until you get up to where you want your armhole to begin. And then I would suggest taking another quick stab at blocking any of the areas that you just joined. So the front and the back, where those seams happened, that's a great place to hit with a little bit of steam. And then the same with these side seams. The rectangles that you used as your main pieces should still be blocked and beautiful, but it's nice to hit the seams with a little bit of steam because that will make them lie even flatter. Bumps or weird inconsistencies with the seams can often be taken care of with a little bit of blocking at the seams. Once both side seams are finished, we are going to use the crab stitch to create a nice edging for the sleeves. I am going to demonstrate this to you on the opposite armhole here. We just need to attach our yarn in the join right here under the armhole. Now I have my yarn attached here, and the crab stitch, or it's also known as reverse single crochet, is kind of peculiar, and it causes your brain to work a little differently because you are going to crochet in the opposite direction you normally do. So if you're right-handed, typically you work in this direction, right? If you work around something, you're working clockwise. If you're left-handed, you work in this direction and you're working counterclockwise in the round. The difference with reverse single crochet is that you're actually going opposite. That's really the only thing you need to know because everything else about it is just like typical single crochet. So let's look at how it works in practice. I already have my chain one, which is the same you would do in a typical row of single crochet. And then I'm going to insert my hook in the next stitch. For me, that's this direction to the right because I'm right-handed. And I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop, so now I have two, just like a typical single crochet, and then yarn over again and pull through. So I've just completed a single crochet. The only thing that's different is where I put my hook because I'm working in the opposite direction I normally do. Now I'm going to insert my hook in the next stitch, pull up a loop, I have two loops of my hook, yarn over and pull through. You're going to notice here that the stitches are twisting. Like as you do this, your loop begins to twist, and that doesn't mean anything's wrong. That's actually intentional, and that's what creates that nice, delicate sort of it almost looks like a twisted ribbon. And I love to use this stitch as a blanket border. This is my favorite way to finish off corner to corner projects. If you're not sure what other edging to add, I really think you can't go wrong with reverse single crochet. The one thing to know if you want to use this skill on another project is that it definitely works the best if you have a row of single crochet first to set it up. So if you've worked a different stitch for a blanket or a different garment, I would do a row of single crochet so you can set the foundation for this, and then it's super easy to just single crochet in each stitch along the row. And what you end up with is beautiful and delicate and modern, and it just works in so many different projects. So we're going to continue like that. If you are right-handed, you are working counterclockwise around the sleeve. If you are left-handed, you're working clockwise like this, the opposite of how you would normally do it. And when you get back to the bottom here, you can fasten off and weave in your ends, and then you can repeat the same process, the same edging on your opposite sleeve. All right, are you getting excited? We are almost done. I'm not going to actually demonstrate sewing on the buttons because there's a billion YouTube videos for that if you're new to sewing on buttons, but I wanted to show you the buttons I used and what you're looking for in your buttons. These are La Mode, and I bought them at Joann's, and specifically the size that I think works well here is 7/16 of an inch. So that is 11 millimeters. So if you want to replicate the look of this sample here, that's the size buttons you're looking for. And when I am sewing on buttons, I think the hardest part is figuring out the spacing. I just wanted to share that my buttons are going to be about 2 inches apart. like just under 2 inches apart. Depending on the length of your front seam, that will determine how many buttons you want to use. But if you want to use the rough math of every 2 inches, that'll help you figure out how many you're going to need. And then I wanted to explain the other supplies you'll need for this. I'm using a sewing needle, and I have a few strands of embroidery floss here because I didn't have any thread that will match the buttons. So any old thread that you have that will recede into the button collar, that's what I would recommend. And then go ahead and stitch each of your buttons on, and I will meet you back here to celebrate. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you found it helpful, I would love it if you gave it a thumbs up and considered subscribing to my channel for more modern free crochet patterns and tutorials just like this. Thanks for watching, and happy crocheting!